Hello, everybody. This is meteorologist Andrew Pinero from Inside the Garage. A little bit of an odd place, however, we do have a fairly nice weekend, so let's get straight off to that with the weekend outlook. I'm just going to step off to the side here. And essentially, with the weekend outlook, it looks like we're going to be seeing very nice conditions for your day on Saturday. It's going to be very sunny. It's going to be almost 50 degrees in a lot of spots. Some areas, maybe around New York City, can see even areas temperatures getting up into the low to possibly mid-50s. But I'm going to stick to right around that 50-degree mark for pretty much all the tri-state region. Then for Sunday, it's going to be a tad bit cooler. Not by much, still in the 40s or mid to upper 40s for a lot of people. But we're going to see tad bit more cloud cover, and then later in the day, or more so in the evening, that's where the clouds are going to be on the increase. And with the increasing clouds, that's where we're going to be seeing the next storm system going into Monday. So briefly, I'm just going to talk about that real quick. The system coming through Monday, it's really going to be later in the day. Just some spotty showers. Then it looks like going into Tuesday, that's where we're seeing our next real rainmaker. But this is a weekend outlook, and there's going to be a little bit about a car video coming up soon. But for the weekend outlook part, yeah, it looks like it's a very nice, mild, I'm going to call it maybe spring-like or early March-like weather. So definitely get outside if you can this weekend, because it's going to be feeling fairly nice. Now onto the car part. Since it's going to be a nice weekend, you might want to have a couple little maintenance things you want to do with the car. Even though it's still winter, you still got some little bit of winter to go, so there could still be snowstorms. I don't see any for the next week or so, but you definitely do want to have your car ready just in case of any kind of snowstorm. So let's take a look at some things that I do that maybe you should be doing as well. So usually I like to start from the front of the car and go back. So the front of the car, the radiator. Always check down here to make sure there's no clogs. Depending on the car, some cars have belt-driven fans, some have a motor or electric motor-driven fans. This one has electric motors, so I want to make sure there's nothing near the connectors. Pretty clear. Can't show you here, but you want to check in front of the radiator, make sure there's no blockages either. That all looks good. The radiator tubing you also want to check. That's pretty good. There's a couple. There's one at the top. There's a big one at the bottom. Now, depending also on your car, you may have two radiators. Turbocharged or supercharged cars have a second radiator called an intercooler. This one's right up top here. So with this one, you want to make sure there's no blockages either. This is what's called an air-to-air intercooler. There's hot air coming in from the turbocharger on this side that meets through the radiator fins cold air coming from the hood scoop. That cools down the air before it goes out this side and into the air intake manifold, which is right in the middle here. So that's what keeps everything nice and cool with a turbocharger or a supercharger, any kind of forced air induction system. So this looks nice and clear. Another spot you want to check is also the air filter in the front. So a lot of these have clips on them. This separates right here. With a little bit of finagling, the air filter comes out. So, not sure if you could see it too well. Tiny bit dirty. There's some pollen on the inside there. So, you either blow that out, brush it out. If you want to brush it out, be very careful. I'm just going to pick it out here. But essentially, yeah, you want to make sure this is nice and clean, because this is where the airflow that goes into your car, whether it's forced air induction or not, this is what feeds your car. Next here, while I still have the cover that I took off for the intercooler off, there's a little speck there, the serpentine belt. So this belt here is very important because all of the other things that run off your car come from the engine. A couple of things like air conditioning, the oil filter, and this right here is called the alternator. The alternator is what takes the engine power, transfers that or turns that into electricity that recharges the battery over there. So that's very important. You want to make sure it looks pretty clean and check the tension on it as well. You want to have maybe a 1/2 inch, not really too much give. You don't want to be too tight either because that could make it break, but you don't want it to be too loose either. So just maybe that little 1/2 inch of give. That's pretty much all you want. That's about it. So that looks pretty good there. Now coming back over to this side, this is where a lot of the fluids are. The oil filter, just want to check to make sure it's not damaged. If you watched, I did do an oil change video a few months ago where I put this new oil filter in. That's the oil filter cap. You want to check your windshield wash, make sure that's pretty good. What I usually do is I use de-icer windshield wash all year round, so I don't have to worry about whether I'm confused if I have it in there or not. It doesn't hurt anything just to have de-icer windshield wash in there, so I just always keep that in year round. Next is the coolant. There's a little line here where it's filled and empty, or add it says. You want to have it not necessarily full, because when the antifreeze expands and it heats up, it expands. So if you fill it to the full line when it's cold, you're going to overflow, and that's very bad. Also here, this is the radiator fill cap. My engine is still a little warm, so it's not completely cool. It's cool enough to touch, but I don't know necessarily cool enough for the radiator. So I'm not going to pop that open, but this is pressurized. So you definitely want to be careful with that. Never, ever open that when the car is hot. And even though we don't have a lot of electric cars, all cars have batteries. This is the car battery. Usually the red side, the positive side, this is covered. The black side, the negative side, not necessarily covered. This one here, it depends on what kind of car you have. This one is not a maintenance-free battery. These little twist covers, that's for all the different cells in the battery to make sure they're full. You can also see there's a line in here. I'm not sure, you're not going to see it on the camera here, but I can see it. You want to make sure this is full, and if you ever have to refill it, only put distilled water in there. You don't want to put anything else but distilled water. Another important thing you always want to check, this is called the master cylinder. The master cylinder is down here. This is the master cylinder reservoir. Behind that, this black round thing, that's the booster. That's what makes braking much easier compared to older cars. Now, I drive manual transmission, stick, gear lever, whatever you want to call it, manual transmission. So there's also a clutch master cylinder for the clutch pedal. That one's tucked down in there. So older cars had a reservoir specifically for the clutch. However, this reservoir is shared between the clutch master cylinder and the brake master cylinder. Well, I just put the cover on for the intercooler and the accessories again, but the last thing, but not the least thing you want to check, oil. Engine doesn't have oil, nothing will run. So usually a couple things I do, as soon as I take the dipstick out, I just visually check the oil. There's a couple of dots here. Not sure how well you can see those two dots. One's about there, one's about there. And it's hard to see the oil on the camera, but I can see it's right at the tip of the top dot, which is good. And usually I just clean it off, then stick it back in. Couple seconds, then take it out one more time, just to double check and verify everything's good. And everything looks good here. Wipe that off. Put the dipstick in, and that's pretty much it for the little bit of maintenance, checking all the fluids, oil. One more thing you always want to check before we start heading to the back of the car is the windshield wipers. If you can't see while you're driving, that is dangerous for you and for other drivers. So, depending on the type of car you have, you may have uneven windshield wipers. On this one, the further away one, the passenger side, this wiper is shorter than this wiper. So you want to keep that in mind if you're trying to buy new wipers. You want to match them to the correct size. Also, checking the wiper itself, you want to make sure the blade is pretty clean. Make sure it's not bent or there's any rips or tears on it. These look pretty good. They're still fairly new. The car is still less than a year old. So these wipers look pretty good. Also, while you're up here, on the top, there's a vent in here. This is usually for the cabin. Inside the cabin, that's where you get your air that you're breathing in. So you want to make sure there's nothing blocking here. That's for the air conditioning intake, the heating intake. Another part of the heating system you don't really have access to is the heating core. That's deep inside the car frame. You can't really see that. But just, make sure everything up here is pretty much clean. And one more thing. Inside the car, in a lot of new cars, there is a cabin air filter. So the cabin air filter, you don't have to replace too often. You just got to clean it out every once in a while. I'm not going to show you that in here just because it gets a little bit deep and a little bit intricate, and every car is a little bit different. But essentially, that's what you want to keep checking. Cabin air filter, engine air filter. And now, let's take a look inside the car. Inside the car, a couple things that you always want to keep up with maintenance. Vacuuming. I know it's not the most exciting thing to do, but you want to keep the inside of your car clean because then that'll prevent smells from happening. It could prevent a couple other things. You definitely want to make sure you don't have any oil spills in there. And in here, a couple of things. Whether you have a manual transmission or an automatic transmission, you always want to check the shifter just to make sure it gets into the right spot. So with manual, I just push in the clutch. You hear the gears engaging and disengaging. Make sure everything feels smooth. If anything doesn't feel good in there, you definitely want to check that out and make sure, because if you can't get the right gear shifting, it's not going to work well on the road. Same thing with the automatic. Check, park, drive, all the gears in between. Some of them also have paddle shifters or a CVT. Want to make sure everything feels good while you're shifting. The other thing too, this is not called an emergency brake. This is not for emergencies. This is what I call just the handbrake. So this you want to use when you park the car. Even if you have an automatic, once you put it in park, that's only one thing. If that parking gear ever slips, you can roll the car. So this I use for parking, especially in a manual transmission. So if this is down, I'm on a very even surface. So I don't have the brake pedal down, and I have the handbrake off, shifter and neutral, so it's not doing anything right now. But usually what I do when I park, I engage the handbrake, and then I usually put it in first gear. So that way, if the handbrake slips, the transmission, to an extent, can prevent the car from rolling. And the other way, with automatic transmissions, if you just put it in park, and that slips, the car will roll. So if you engage the handbrake or the parking brake, if the parking gear slips, you have that to rely on. So you have a backup system. That's always good to have. And then that's pretty much it in here. Also, if you guys want to see a video about how to drive stick with the clutch pedal, gear shifting, I can do a video on that if you guys want. Just let me know in the comments down below. One thing I forgot to mention at the front side of the car, the headlights. Definitely want to make sure those are clean. Same thing with the tail lights and the reverse lights. Want to make sure those are all clean, because if other cars can't see you coming or see if you're stopping, that can cause quite a bit of problems as well. Now moving on to the tires. Always want to check the tread of the tire. I happen to have a snow tire on right now because it's still winter, but you still want to make sure it is nice and clean in the tread. You don't want to have rocks or anything stuck in there. If you do have older tires, you can always use the penny test. Put the penny in upside down. If you can see the top of Lincoln's head, that means your tread is below the legal limit, so you definitely need new tires there. Also, you want to check to make sure the rim looks good. Mine's a little bit dusty right now with the brake dust, but otherwise that's pretty much it. Want to make sure there's nothing around the lug nuts because that's what keeps your tire on the car, and the tire is the main thing that stops your car, or essentially it's the rubber part of the tire that's what stops the car. The brakes don't actually stop the car. The brakes stop the wheel from spinning. The wheel is actually what stops the car. So this is the most important safety thing right there. And then, want to find, there it is, the valve stem. Always want to check your tire pressure. I have a little tire gauge here. So it looks like I am at 32 psi. A tiny bit low, maybe like a psi or two low, but that's within the safety range. Now you may hear some people talking about you want to deflate your tires more and underinflate them for the winter. I wouldn't say do that. Definitely keep the tires where they're supposed to be at according to the manufacturer. The only time you want to deflate your tires is if you're doing off-road rock crawling. That's where you want to have deflated tires, when you're trying to climb up a rock wall with your car. Alright, so that pretty much wraps up this video. Different style, a little bit more about the cars. If you like car videos, I'll have some more coming up. And maybe if you want, like I mentioned, I'll do a video on how to drive stick, how to drive manual, whatever you want to call it, gear lever, how to drive, maybe how to drive in general. Whatever you guys want, just definitely let me know in the comments. I'll have those videos coming. And now for the last little treat, little startup of the car. In the very end of the tailpipe there, I'll have the camera facing right there. Stick around for that. Otherwise, have a great evening, everybody. Enjoy the weekend ahead. This is meteorologist Andrew Pinero.